loved 7 famous women. Each one is a wound. I don't regret loving them, but I regret trusting them.
I once loved 8 famous women. Each one of them left a wound. I do not regret having loved, but I do regret having trusted them. This was not a line from a movie, but the very real confession of Angie Dickinson, the legendary sex symbol of her era, in a rare interview with CBS Sunday Morning in 2025. At the age of 93, Angie no longer chose silence or avoidance. On camera, she went on to name, one by one, 7 screen goddesses she had secretly been romantically involved with. But what left Hollywood utterly stunned into silence was not the list of lovers, but the way she ended it all with a chilling remark: "I hate them." So, who were the women that Angie both loved and resented until the very end of her life? What did they do that left her so bitter she felt compelled to declare, "I'm not afraid to expose each and every one of them"? And the very first name Angie mentioned was Joan Crawford. Number 1. Joan Crawford, the kiss in the dark and the fabricated marriage contract. I once thought she loved me, but no. Joan only wanted a doll, obedient, silent, and always ready to get into bed whenever she demanded. And I, the fool, believed those eyes. The first time Angie Dickinson encountered Joan Crawford was not on a film set, but at a private party hosted by MGM. There, young actresses were invited as nothing more than elegant ornaments for the powerful producers. At the time, Angie was just 22, having signed a short-term contract with the studio, her name not yet once appearing on a poster, clinging to the faint hope of landing a tiny role with a few lines. And then, Joan entered, hair swept into a high bun, black silk gloves on her hands, and eyes as cold as stone cutting across the crowd. Throughout the party, she never took her gaze off Angie. When it ended, Joan pulled her into a dim hallway and whispered, her voice soft but sharp as a blade, "If you want to survive in Hollywood, you need someone to protect you. I choose you. And you don't have the right to refuse." Just days later, Angie was suddenly called in to audition for a supporting role in a film that featured Joan. Yet no one truly cared about the role itself. The only thing burned into Angie's memory was that evening, when the set had emptied out and Joan told her to stay behind to rehearse an intimate scene. I stood still, like a soulless corpse, letting her touch wherever she wanted. I can still recall it. Her hands were ice cold, but her breath burned hot against my neck. Angie would later recount in a hushed, distant voice. For more than a year afterward, Angie never secured a leading role, and yet she was present at every one of Joan's private parties, joined her on secret getaways to Santa Barbara, and attended countless so-called creative meetings that always took place in hotel rooms rather than on sound stages. No one at MGM dared to question it, because everyone knew Joan had chosen her, and once Joan chose, no one else was permitted to interfere. The illusion began to crumble in May 1955, when Joan abruptly announced her marriage to Alfred Steele, the Pepsi-Cola magnate. The press gushed, calling it a modern-day fairy tale romance. But for Angie, it was the doorway to hell. After the wedding, Joan severed all contact. The phone calls ceased. The hotel nights evaporated. In a moment of weakness, Angie wrote her a letter, part longing, part reproach. But she never imagined that Joan would read that very letter aloud in front of friends at a party. Some laughed, some looked on with pity. Joan only shrugged and remarked bitterly, "Young girls these days think one glance means eternal love. How tiresome." From that point, rumors about Angie began to spread, that she was clinging to older women, that she was unable to control her emotions, that she exhibited unstable psychological tendencies. None of it was confirmed, but none of it was denied. Alfred Steele, after noticing his wife sneaking out on several occasions, hired a private investigator. On August 11th, I to see he received a photograph of Joan and Angie leaving a private house in Laurel Canyon near midnight. Confidential magazine immediately offered $30,000 for the image. MGM rushed into an emergency meeting, paying $50,000 to silence the publication, an astronomical sum for the time. But no amount of money could erase the damage. Angie's contract was terminated within the week. Joan's personal secretary was ordered to erase every trace of her from the studio's internal records. Even worse, Joan personally suggested to MGM that Angie be sent to Europe to further study physical performance and acting skills, a silent exile disguised as professional development. Yet what Angie would come to hate most was not the ruin of her career. It was the brutal truth she discovered later. She had never been Joan's only one. In an old notebook belonging to a former MGM staffer, Angie read at least 5 other names who had suffered the same fate. Nancy Kwan, Deborah Paget, Vera Miles, Jane Greer, and one more, left unnamed. From that wound, Angie hardened into stone. By the time she entered her next relationship, she no longer believed in tears, but fate pushed her into the arms of another woman, one who seemed cold as steel, and whose betrayal would prove far more devastating. Number 2, Barbara Stanwyck, the anonymous accuser who destroyed an entire decade of Angie's career. In 1956, when the Red Scare witch hunt sparked by Senator Joseph McCarthy had not yet fully subsided, Hollywood lived under an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. A single accusation, even an anonymous one, was enough to cost an actor their job, their contracts, and their entire career. It was in this climate that Angie Dickinson entered a relationship she would later describe as a deadly kind of peace, with Barbara Stanwyck, the reigning queen of black and white cinema, a woman with nearly 3 decades in Hollywood and 4 Academy Award nominations to her name. Their first encounter happened backstage at CBS's television program Climax. That day, Angie was just a guest, while Barbara starred in the episode Nightmare at Ground Zero. An exchange of glances that lasted longer than it should have, a casual brush of hands while trading lines, and from that moment, everything began, light as a strand of hair clinging to a sleeve, yet impossible to shake off once caught. From then on, Angie became a regular visitor at Barbara's apartment in Westwood Village, a place with an old piano and a wine shelf filled with Burgundy imported from Lyon. On rainy nights, Barbara would sit at the piano and play, while Angie lounged back on the sofa, eyes closed, listening to the music blending with the frantic beating of her own heart. One night, Angie whispered, "Do you ever feel afraid?" If one day all of this were discovered, Barbara gave a faint smile, her fingers never leaving the keys. Hollywood isn't afraid of love, Angie. It's only afraid of the truth. But the truth, like a snake coiled beneath a chair, eventually begins to slither out. At first, Angie believed she was truly loved, until one spring night, she stumbled upon Barbara in a car with a strange man, barely a few hundred meters from the studio. They exchanged a thick envelope. Barbara glanced at her for just 1 second, then drove off without a word. 2 weeks later, an anonymous 3-page typewritten letter arrived at the MPAA. It accused Angie of sexual deviance, of frequently gathering with leftist intellectual circles in Laurel Canyon, and of questioning her loyalty to America. Enclosed were 3 blurry photographs showing Angie in Barbara's backyard, wearing a bathrobe and holding a Persian cat. In one of them, Barbara's shadow could be seen reflected in the glass door. On March 21, 1957, Angie was summoned for questioning. The interrogation lasted nearly 4 hours, without a lawyer, without a transcript, just a single man repeating one question over and over in a flat, mechanical voice. "Did you have a physical relationship with Barbara Stanwyck?" Angie refused to answer, but from that day forward, her career disintegrated as though it had never existed. Columbia canceled her contract, Paramount halted negotiations. Even the local radio station refused to broadcast a pre-recorded interview with her. Angie fell into a state of collapse, locking herself away at home for 4 months. Worst of all, she realized Barbara had set the trap, because there was only one person who knew she had visited Laurel Canyon every Wednesday night, and that was the same person who had played piano for her through the rain. Yet Angie did not remain entirely silent. At the end of 1957, she returned the piano Barbara had once gifted her, accompanied by a short note. "I have learned not to sing when traps are laid around my voice. Thank you for teaching me the value of silence at the right moment." The story never reached the press. But years later, at an Oscar after-party in 1964, veteran journalist Robert E. Morrison of the Los Angeles Times let slip that the handwriting on the envelope of Angie's denunciation letter looked identical to Barbara's internal notes at CBS. No one denied it, and no one was surprised. But Angie never forgot. Every time she passed the studio where Barbara once filmed, she would slow the car, roll down the window, look at the trees lining the path, and murmur to herself, "There are people who love you only to kill you from within." And Barbara was the first. Yet if Barbara was the one who stripped Angie of her career, then the next woman would force her to pay simply for the privilege of forgetting. A contract worth $100,000, bought for one thing only, silence. Number 3, Bette Davis, the $100,000 silence contract. "I once believed that Bette Davis would be the only person brave enough to stand by my side in the blazing light. But in the end, she was only brilliant at playing the role of courage on the screen, while in real life, she was the very first to place me on the bargaining table in exchange for her reputation. In March 1960, at the mansion of director Howard Hawks on Benedict Canyon Drive, a private gathering of Hollywood's A-list unfolded. Angie Dickinson, who had just gained attention with her role as Feathers in Rio Bravo, was invited as one of the new faces worth watching. What she never expected was that the first person to notice her would be none other than Bette Davis, a Hollywood icon, then 52 years old, twice an Oscar winner, and a woman no one in the industry dared to refuse. Bette didn't approach Angie with her fame, but with an unexpected tenderness. The way she handed her a glass of wine, the subtle touch of her hand, and the quiet question whispered between the strains of jazz. Do you know your eyes can make people forget where they are? That night, they both left the party together for the Bel Air Hotel, room 628. A housekeeper later recalled, "The lights stayed on until 5 in the morning, and the only requests made were for a pot of warm water and a bottle of Burgundy, nothing else." The relationship continued, discreet but filled with passion. Sunday breakfasts on the upper floors of the Chateau Marmont, evenings where Angie read poetry while Bette listened with the gaze of someone calculating something far greater than love. Then one day, Angie hesitantly voiced her desire to live honestly, not to go public in a spectacle, just to no longer pretend to be friends whenever they appeared in public. Bette looked at her, smiled faintly, and said nothing. 2 weeks later, on April 14, 1960, Angie received an envelope from the law office of Lambert and White, delivered directly to the Ocean's 11 set at Warner Brothers. Inside was a 3-page agreement. The bold title reading, Permanent Confidentiality Agreement between Bette Davis and Angie Dickinson. The contract stated explicitly, Angie was prohibited from disclosing any details of her intimate relationship with Bette, whether to the press, in memoirs, documentaries, or personal accounts. In return, she would receive $100,000 in cash and a leading role in Storms of Yesterday, an Allied Artists production, a film that, ultimately, was never made. At the bottom of the final page, there was a line typed and then handwritten in addition, believed to be in Bette's own hand. "I don't want pity. I only want to be remembered as a legend, not as a weak woman lost in something foolish." Angie did not sign immediately. She carried the contract with her to the Ivy Cafe, sitting alone the entire afternoon. When television journalist Connie Chung unexpectedly walked in, Angie stood up, slipped the contract into her bag, and smiled as though she had never been broken. But just 2 days later, she was forced to sign. A senior Warner Brothers executive warned her, if she refused, every contract currently in negotiation will be postponed indefinitely, including 2 films already set to begin shooting. The role in Storms of Yesterday never materialized. The project was canceled without explanation. Angie withdrew from public appearances, and by August 1960, she was admitted to Cedars-Sinai with the diagnosis: severe nervous exhaustion caused by professional stress. Bette Davis never called, never sent flowers, never even left a note of concern. Yet at the Golden Globe after-party in early 1961, when asked, "Have you heard that Angie has been hospitalized?" Bette took a sip of her drink, pressed her lips into a thin smile, and coolly replied, "I don't even remember knowing anyone by that name." Years later, on NBC's Inside Hollywood, Angie sighed and admitted, "I don't blame her. I only blame myself for loving someone who treated feelings like stage props to play her part in a false life." And so, after the $100,000 contract, Angie lost not only a relationship, but also the last remnants of her belief in what could be called sincerity in Hollywood. But fate had not yet released her. For the next woman, the one cloaked in heartbreaking gentleness, would be the very person to drag Angie into one of her most humiliating tragedies. And it all began with a name: Katharine Hepburn. Number 4, Katharine Hepburn, the Oscar role paid for with love. The 4th woman who stepped into Angie Dickinson's life never had to raise her voice to hurt anyone. She did not resort to violence, nor did she curse or betray in an obvious way. And yet, precisely because of that restraint, she was by far the most dangerous of them all. Katharine didn't need words to bring me down. Just a single glance from her was enough to make me feel small, unnecessary, and completely invisible. Angie confessed in her 2025 interview with journalist Rita Braver on CBS Sunday Morning. Their first encounter took place at a private script reading hosted by director Edward Dmytryk in Bel Air at the end of 1961. The film was Reflections in a Golden Eye. The role ultimately went to Elizabeth Taylor, but Angie never forgot that evening. The cold, piercing stare of Katharine locking onto her, like a blade etching itself into her memory. Hepburn didn't need to say much. Her eyes alone gave the impression that she was casting a role in a play, and Angie instinctively understood she was never meant to be invited onto that stage. A few days later, Angie unexpectedly received an invitation to dinner at Hepburn's Coldwater Canyon estate, the former refuge of Spencer Tracy, now Catherine's private sanctuary, filled with shelves of war books, wooden sculptures, and dominated by a black Steinway piano set against a wide glass window. That evening, no script was discussed. Instead, they listened to Brahms, sipped Martel XO, and sat in silence across from one another. Near midnight, Catherine walked over, placed a hand on Angie's shoulder, and whispered, "I've played the role of a man for so many years that I've almost forgotten I can still be a woman. If the person across from me is fragile enough." Then she kissed Angie. It was not hurried, nor was it passionate. It felt more like a calculated declaration of possession, a gesture of dominance laced with control. Pulling back, Catherine looked directly into her eyes and said, "If you think this is love, then you don't belong in Hollywood. This is an arena, and anyone who believes in emotions is the first to lose." 3 days later, Angie's name was removed from the casting list. Meanwhile, Hepburn was handed the lead role in Long Day's Journey into Night. Rumors quickly spread that Catherine had locked herself in director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's office for over an hour, and afterward everything changed. Angie refused to accept it quietly. She wrote a 4-page denunciation and sent it directly to Warner Brothers, detailing how she had been manipulated emotionally and exploited under the guise of intimacy and power. She even included a photocopied note she had secretly captured, in which Hepburn had written, "I'm not sure this girl has the courage to play someone who is broken, but I'm certain she has been broken before." The studio's response came in the form of a cold legal memorandum. Insufficient evidence for the accusations. Any further public statements may be considered a violation of industry ethics clauses. Immediately afterward, Angie's name was erased from 2 tentative television projects. An NBC Fall Showcase dropped her from its guest lineup just hours before airtime, citing scheduling issues. Catherine continued to shine. She won the Academy Award for The Lion in Winter in 1968 and once again with On Golden Pond in 1981. Angie, by contrast, slipped into obscurity, relegated to minor roles as anonymous policewomen and policewoman, late-night perfume commercials, and talk show invitations canceled at the very last minute. In a later conversation, Angie clasped her teacup tightly, her voice trembling. "I thought after Bette Davis I had already hit rock bottom, but Catherine showed me. Sometimes the bottom is deeper than hell itself, especially when the one who pushes you down kisses you before doing it." She thought she could not feel any weaker, could not fall any further. But then another woman appeared, a woman with eyes sweet as honey and a smile touched with Parisian charm. A woman who once held Angie's hand through the night at the Ritz Hotel, but who later, behind her back, sent a devastating photograph straight to Paramount's office. From that moment, Angie lost more than just roles, reputation, or love. She lost the last fragile belief that any woman in Hollywood might love without calculation. That woman was Ava Gardner, and Paris, instead of being a place of escape, became the place where the final remnants of Angie's soul were destroyed. Chapter 5. Ava Gardner, the fateful photographs at the Lutetia Hotel. The 5th woman on the list was the only one Angie Dickinson ever admitted to being love without defenses, without calculation, and without conditions. Yet it was that very love which turned into a merciless dagger stabbing straight back into her heart, leaving her in a pain she could never have imagined. "I loved Ava like a fool. I didn't hide. I didn't pretend. I laid my heart bare in the middle of a Paris winter, and Ava was the only one who ever held it, only to let it fall to the floor afterward, as if it had never even existed," Angie recalled with a trembling voice. They first met in November 1964 at a clandestine party organized by Cahiers du Cinéma in the basement of the George V Hotel. At that time, Ava was already a legendary figure, living in self-exile across Europe after her stormy divorce from Frank Sinatra. Angie, meanwhile, had just wrapped scenes for the series The Killers and was passing through Paris for only a few days. No paparazzi, no studio handlers, only cold gin, slow jazz, and women exhaling smoke from silver-tipped cigarettes. Ava was the one who made the first move. She placed a hand on Angie's shoulder, smiled, and whispered, "I heard you once made Bette Davis storm off in the middle of a shoot. If that's true, you deserve a glass of cold gin." Only 3 days later, the two of them moved in together at room 403 of the Lutetia Hotel. Every morning, Angie awoke to see Ava curled up like a cat in the white sheets, her lips still tasting faintly of alcohol, her eyes carrying the weight of a world that seemed to pause for just a moment. On one rainy night, as the hum of cars drifted along Boulevard Raspail below, Ava leaned close to Angie's ear and whispered, "If you were a man, I would have married you, but you're not. And this world is never kind to people like us. They never wrote love letters. They never exchanged promises. But Angie believed. For the first time since the scars left by Bette Davis, Barbara Stanwyck, and Katharine Hepburn, she allowed herself to breathe as if she truly existed. Until one December morning, Ava vanished. No note, no farewell kiss, only a Polaroid film roll left on the table. From the night before when they had been laughing, playing a question and answer game. That roll of film, however, turned out to be the snare that sealed their fate. 2 weeks later, when Angie returned to Los Angeles, an anonymous envelope was waiting at her door. Inside was a Polaroid photo, clearly taken from the window opposite the Lutetia. It showed Angie holding Ava, both wrapped in a blanket, their eyes locked together in an intimacy too raw to misinterpret. On the back of the photo, a scrawled note read, $15,000, or this picture will be the cover of Confidential next month. Meet at Lee Select, Paris, the 14th. Angie panicked. So did Ava. They sold jewelry, even sold a Degas painting that Ava had once been gifted by Man Ray. Still, it wasn't enough. And then, the journalist Jules Meyerson, infamous for prying into the private lives of actresses, splashed another photo across the cover of Scandal Weekly. Who is the woman sleeping in Ava Gardner's room? The picture was blurry enough that lawyers couldn't sue, but clear enough for all of Hollywood to understand. 3 days later, Warner Bros. Abruptly removed Angie's name from the project The High Wall. Ava, meanwhile, was stripped from the 1965 Golden Globes nomination list, despite already being mentioned internally. Their careers froze for nearly 2 years. Ava retreated to Marbella, refusing all press. Angie fled to Italy to make small independent films, and even lost her advertising contract with Helena Rubinstein for lacking a positive public image. No more letters, no more meetings. Only a faint rumor remained that in the spring of 1971, Ava quietly returned the original photo to Angie, accompanied by a small handwritten note. I once kept this photo as proof that I had truly been loved, but I was the one who made it ugly. Forgive me for letting it fall into someone else's hands. Angie kept that photograph in the drawer of her bedside table until the very end of her life. She never mentioned Ava again, but those close to her said that whenever someone uttered the word Paris, Angie's eyes would glaze over for a few seconds before she forced a laugh and changed the subject. If Ava Gardner was the most beautiful scar Angie ever carried, then the next woman would become the flame that burned away every shred of faith she still had left. A global sex symbol, someone who once told Angie she loved her inside a Fox Studios dressing room, but later, with her own lips, handed her over to the press like a sensational gift. And that name was none other than Marilyn Monroe. Number 6. Marilyn Monroe, the cold revenge between two women devoured by Hollywood. Marilyn was like smoke. The more you tried to reach out and hold her, the faster she vanished. But the moment you stopped, stood still, she wrapped herself around you, suffocating you. Those were Angie's words, spoken one drunken night in 1977 to columnist Liz Smith. After saying it, she fell silent and refused to explain further. Yet the truth was this: between Angie Dickinson and Marilyn Monroe there once existed a fleeting affair. Brief, intoxicating, drenched in desire, and it ended in one of the dirtiest media wars Hollywood had ever witnessed. A brutal duel between two women who both knew that sometimes a single rumor could bring down the entire world. Autumn 1961. Marilyn was secretly undergoing treatment for depression at the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic after her devastating divorce from Arthur Miller. Life magazine had arranged a private photo session in New York. At the very same time, Angie was at the studio, not to pose but to film behind-the-scenes footage for promotional material for Jessica. Fate conspired to place them side by side in the makeup room on the 4th floor of the Carlyle Hotel. One woman stared into the mirror, her eyes still wet with sadness as if she had just cried. The other gazed through that same mirror and saw her own reflection, more fragile than ever. Angie spoke first, without realizing she had struck the rawest nerve. "You keep staring into the mirror like that. One day it will break, because mirrors reflect the truth, and the truth is something no one can bear." Marilyn let out a faint laugh, but the corners of her lips trembled. She turned toward Angie and whispered, as though speaking to herself, "Are you an angel, or just another wound knocking at my door?" That night, they slept together, room 728, the Carlyle, yellow light flooding down, the scent of Chanel No. 5 mingled with the bitterness of sleeping pills and the faint burnt smell of hair singed by a faulty curling iron. Angie would later say Marilyn was not as beautiful in person as on screen, but when she whispered, "You don't have to save me, just stay until morning," every trace of logic, Every defense I had vanished. But only 5 days later, Marilyn was gone. No phone call, no letter, nothing left behind except a whisper spread by a Fox publicist. She's with someone new, a younger face the studio is grooming to replace the blonde bombshell. Angie forced a smile, but inside, it was as if acid had been poured over her heart. For the first time in her life, she did not cry. She struck back. Angie's PR team, led by Steve Larrabee, once an investigative reporter for The Hollywood Reporter specializing in scandals, launched an anonymous smear campaign. Unsigned letters were mailed to the Los Angeles Mirror, Photoplay, Modern Screen. Marilyn Monroe is losing control. Screaming in the Beverly Hills Hotel, smashing glasses into mirrors, 3 nights without sleep after being abandoned by her lover. They even fabricated a psychiatrist's report, claiming Marilyn showed signs of paranoia. Convinced everyone was watching her, the stories spread like wildfire. Within a week, Marilyn's face was splashed across the headlines, no longer as a sex symbol, but as the picture of madness unraveling. But Angie wasn't finished. She learned Marilyn was secretly writing a memoir for Random House, with an entire chapter titled The Woman I Loved, but Hollywood forbade me to keep. Angie reached out to 3 major studios, Fox, Paramount, Columbia. A closed-door meeting was held at the Beverly Hills Hotel. The result? The contract was canceled, the manuscript confiscated, and Marilyn was forbidden from naming any real names. The pages were shredded under the watchful eyes of studio lawyers. Marilyn was shattered. In June 1962, she sent Angie a short internal telegram, unsigned, containing just one line. "I don't hate you. I'm only sad because you learned Hollywood's ways too quickly, and you used them to kill me." It was the last time they ever communicated. 2 months later, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood bedroom, a bottle of barbiturates scattered across the floor. The last photograph of her was a blurred portrait, her eyes staring into some distant void. Angie did not attend the funeral. She claimed she was busy filming in Texas, but according to her close friend, actress Nancy Kovac, on the very night Marilyn died, Angie smashed the mirror in her living room and whispered through tears, "If I hadn't planted those rumors, would you still be alive?" If Ava Gardner had destroyed Angie's faith in love, then Marilyn Monroe stripped her of her last shred of humanity. And still, the list was not complete, because the final one was not a fleeting intoxication, not a wild night amid Parisian jazz, nor a broken mirror in Beverly Hills. The last one lived beside her for nearly 4 years, shared every dinner, held her hand on red carpets like a devoted partner, yet behind her back, whispered the single sentence that cut deepest of all: "I never loved you. I was only afraid that I might truly be loved by you." Number 7. Elizabeth Taylor, The Purple Nightmare and the Blood-Stained Letter That Silently Killed a Love. The last name on the list was also the only one Angie Dickinson ever truly believed would stay by her side. Not just for a few fleeting nights, not just through a handful of passing scenes on film, but forever. And it was precisely because of that belief that this betrayal became the one wound Angie could never forgive. Elizabeth Taylor, the dazzling woman draped in violet, the one who brought all of Hollywood to its knees, also once brought Angie Dickinson to hers. She didn't do it through power, but with words whispered in the dark. "We don't need men. We only need each other. And if they ever find out, they will destroy everything." From 1964 until the end of 1967, the 2 most famous women in Hollywood lived together in a white mansion tucked deep into Stone Canyon Road. Bel Air, to the public, they were merely called an oddly inseparable pair of co-stars. But behind the 2-meter-high iron gates existed a marriage without a license, a union of tears, blood, heavy drinking, and dozens of unsent letters. They first met while working on MGM's The Sandpiper, directed by Vincente Minnelli. Angie often served as Elizabeth's stand-in during difficult scenes, because Liz would frequently lose her temper and storm off the set. During the late-night shoots in Big Sur, the 2 would walk hand in hand along the shoreline, hidden in the shadows, far from the cameras and the ever-watchful eyes of the studio. Elizabeth once whispered, her voice dissolving into the sea mist, "When I'm with you, I don't have to act anymore. You make me feel truly alive." Angie believed her, and she moved in. But the deeper she loved, the more lost she became. Elizabeth didn't just want to possess Angie, she controlled her entirely. Love turned into chains, shackling her with a sick, obsessive jealousy. On the red carpet, Liz still appeared hand in hand with Richard Burton, smiling for the flashes, but behind closed doors, she clutched Angie, kissed her until she couldn't breathe, and screamed like a madwoman whenever Angie hinted at leaving. The breaking point came one night in October 1966. Angie returned from a script reading at CBS, opened the bedroom door, and found Elizabeth sitting on the bed in a silk robe, one leg casually draped across the lap of director Mike Nichols, who at the time was casting Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Their laughter echoed through the room as though Angie had never even existed. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She walked silently into the bathroom, smashed the mirror with a horn comb, and left a long gash down her left cheek. Blood streamed along the collar of her nightgown. That scar became the reason Angie refused all close-up roles for the next 3 years. But Angie didn't just bleed. She fought back, in a way Elizabeth could never have foreseen. At the end of 1967, an anonymous 6-page letter arrived at Confidential magazine, typed on a Smith Corona. Its words were as cold and cutting as a knife. Elizabeth Taylor has bartered her body for roles time and again. She isn't addicted to men, she's addicted to power. And every smile she gives is nothing more than a mask powdered in Valium. The piece was later edited and published under the headline, "The Truth Behind Liz Taylor's Painted Face." It hit the stands in early 1968 and rocked Hollywood to its core. Richard Burton went into a fury, demanding to sue the entire editorial team, but the author was never identified. Only Angie knew the truth, that the Smith Corona typewriter had been locked away in her drawer, and the key tossed into the Los Angeles River. Elizabeth never denied it. She never sued. Yet years later, in an interview with Vanity Fair, she dropped a single cryptic line. "There are people who loved me, but they couldn't endure my shadow. And when I left, they turned to ashes." Angie wept when she read those words, not because of pain, but because she finally understood. She had never had the right to keep Elizabeth at all. "She never loved me. She only needed me to love her. And when I could no longer do that, she crushed me like a shattered mirror." Elizabeth would go on to marry once more, to win more Oscars, and to become a global humanitarian icon. Angie, meanwhile, retreated from Hollywood, living quietly in Palm Springs with a blind dog, keeping all the letters she never sent locked inside a wooden box etched with the words, "They once loved me," or perhaps I only thought they did. Chapter 8. Hedda Hopper, the Iron Lady in the Feathered Hat, and the final verdict of the press. If the 7 before had stripped Angie of love, trust, and humanity, then the 8th stole the only thing she had left. Her voice. Hedda Hopper, Hollywood's queen of gossip, the woman with the oversized feathered hats and the pen that could elevate or bury a career with nothing more than a headline. To Angie, she was not a lover, not even a friend, but a judge. And once her verdict was delivered, no appeal was possible. In 1968, as Angie tried to stage a comeback with a supporting role in Bullet, an anonymous letter found its way into Hedda's hands. Inside, every sordid detail of Elizabeth Taylor, of Ava Gardner, even the nights at the Carlisle with Marilyn, all laid out in venomous prose. Hedda never cared whether it was true or false. What she needed was blood to feed her readership. And so, splashed across the front page of the Los Angeles Times, came the explosive headline, "Angie Dickinson, the woman who passed through the beds of Hollywood's goddesses." In a single night, Angie fell from an actress clawing her way back into relevance to a laughingstock. Studios canceled contracts, friends avoided her, and worst of all, the women who had once loved her, or pretended to, stayed silent. Not one voice rose to defend her. In a handwritten letter that was never sent, Angie confessed, "They killed me with love, but you, Hedda, you killed me with your pen. And I would rather face a traitor in my bed than a traitor in the world outside." Hedda Hopper had died in 1966, but her ghost lingered in the archived columns, in the whispers Angie would overhear every time she walked into a room. Until the very end of her life, she remained convinced that the one who truly destroyed her was not Crawford, not Stanwyck, not Taylor, but Hedda, the woman who had never even touched her skin, yet left the deepest scar of all. And so the list closes. 8 faces, 8 ghosts, each one a wound. And Angie, instead of dying from a single fatal blow, bled slowly from 1,000 cuts until nothing remained but memory and the letters she never sent. So, after all the dazzling stage lights, the shimmering silk gowns, the lingering scent of perfume in the air, and the stolen kisses behind the curtains, what remained with Angie Dickinson was nothing more than the unsent letters and the nameless scars etched deep into her soul. 8 faces, 7 romances, and yet, in the end, not a single complete ending truly belonged to her. People once asked, did Angie ever regret it? Perhaps the answer no longer matters now, because the bitterest truths are often the very things no one is ever allowed to know. And what about you? What do you think of these secret affairs? Which of the figures moved you the most or shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below so that together we can continue this story that still feels unfinished. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because we still have many secrets that have never been revealed about a classic Hollywood that was glorious, yet cloaked in shadows. See you again in the next story.